painful and quite swollen and suffering from some headaches and whatnot, but I'm probably about 60 or 70% recovered so far. So make the effort here, and hope I can do justice to all of your interest this morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Would you like to take the questions, Guru Maharaj?
Słyszycie mnie? Tak, słyszymy, Guru Maharaj. Czy chciałbyś teraz zacząć odpowiadać na pytania?
For some reason,
Yes.
interpreters are coming through.
Interest.
Oh no, let's see what's going on there. Guru Vakya, are you on the Polish channel?
Yes, I know. I don't have a channel now. I'm sorry. I had to change the computer because I had a problem with the sound. So.
There is the interpretation. Let me re-add you and see.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry about this. Guru Vakya, there we go. Okay, so we'll start with the questions. Maybe Mohini, you can read while I do this. So Ramakeli is first today.
Yeah, so Ramakeli Devi in Bulgaria, she sends this question. My loving obeisances, dear Guru Maharaj. Please forgive me, my question might be a little long. As you know, my husband is not practicing bhakti, although he is very respectful, supportive, and even encourages me to guide our 3 daughters on the path. I have accepted this situation and try to serve him as a Vaishnava, regardless of whether he is actively practicing. Still, there are small misunderstandings that arise between us. For instance, he often says that prasadam without onions is tasteless, and therefore he rarely eats it. This creates an inner conflict for me. Should I add onions to the food, considering that I am serving the Vaishnava within him and honouring his preferences, or should I refrain, following Krishna's standard for prasadam? In both choices, I see an expression of love for Krishna. Could you please guide me on which choice would be more beneficial for my own bhakti? Thank you.
Well, there's two things that come to mind. One is that the taste of onions can, to some extent, be replaced by asafoetida. So you could add a fair amount of asafoetida and see if that helps. The other thing I would do, perhaps, is, if that doesn't help, is to cook some onions on the side and add them to his portion, having offered the other portion to Krishna. That gives you 2 approaches to try those and see which one works.
So the next question is from Matthew T.
And he asks.
I mean, onions, they're I kind of like some onions, but I don't offer them. But so I can empathize with your husband a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
So yes, Matthew, he asks.
This is Matthew?
Matthew T, yeah, or Matt. I'm not sure if he's on the call, but he sent this question. Is there anything in the Shastras about why demons are manifested? Is it Krishna's way of showing us what happens when we try and remove ourselves from him? Is it possible for certain demonic tendencies actually be dharmic for certain souls to serve a greater plan?
Well, I think that you cannot get away from the fact that some people are impious and some people are offensive. With the jiva has a modicum of will, if you will, and I think that the value of that outweighs the fact that if you have will and the freedom, that inevitably the choice that you will make choices that are not in your interest or that have negative repercussions. you can ask, why doesn't Krishna make us, free from making the wrong choice? But if you have freedom, then then you wouldn't have freedom. Is one answer, of course. And of course, he doesn't make us. That's another thing. We just are. We are part of him, any more than he makes himself. He doesn't make his parts and parcels. We just are. But because some jivas act offensively, make negative choices, and so on and so forth, then there are repercussions. And Krishna mentions in the Gita, in the later chapters, that some of them do so over and over again, and so life after life they're cast into wombs that result in demonic births. But this is really just the repercussions of the way they've acted and the habits that have formed in this regard. Now, it's said about such persons that in Raga-Marga of Goswami, either Goswami or Baldi Vijayabhusan, who's given an extensive commentary on the text, I forget which one, that it said that that if they become demonic enough, they take birth in the Prakat Lila, like Putana, like Aghasura, and so forth. And then they're rectified by Krishna directly. You can step back from that, from a Mahabhagavata perspective, and see it's all happening, by Krishna's will. But then Krishna didn't sanction it; wouldn't happen. But there's will within the will. There's a micro will within the macro will of Krishna, and he tends, not to interfere with the will of the jiva. So, but again, from the macro point of view, you could say, well, it's all been arranged by Krishna, and just see there's a positive to this, because this demon acted in this way, this lila came out, and that lesson was taught, and that's the kind of thing I think you're alluding to in your question. That's kind of like I said, like a macro, perspective, if you will, that you could gravitate towards, or that someone could live in. But from a more focus or micro perspective, there are real reasons that there are demonic influences, and they are, as I said, how we conduct ourselves, and it's a system built into nature of reward and punishment, basically, and so there are consequences for actions. What they're done knowingly or unknowingly. If they're done unknowingly, the consequences would be less. If they're done knowingly, the consequences would be greater. So it's not that Krishna arranges for some people to be demonic. That's at least not. That seemed to be what you were asking, also, for higher reasons or something. There are instances where Krishna does arrange for devotees to make mistakes, like Jai and Vijay, who were the gatekeepers in Vaikuntha. It's complicated, though. They wanted to taste Vira Rasa in relation to Krishna, and that's difficult to do in Vaikuntha. There's three types of Vira: Dharma Vira, Daya Vira, Yuddha Vira. I think they wanted Yuddha Vira, but that's manifest in Goloka, but not in Vaikuntha. So anyway, that's one reason why Krishna arranged then for the Kumaras to come, and then they made their complaints, and the gatekeepers wouldn't let them in, and so on and so forth. And look at it from the other side. Krishna wanted to facilitate their desires; he's controlled by their desires, so he arranged it. There may be instances, like, let's take it's not a demonic instance, but there's an instance in which Krishna deluded Arjuna to speak the Bhagavad Gita. So he may use his devotees in that way sometimes. Sometimes it's possible that if for a sadhaka, Krishna may cause him to do something out of character. and be caught at that and exposed, and then he becomes very humble. And goes the distance. If we look at Bharat Maharaj, who acted in an unbecoming way by attachment to a deer, a fawn, for his stage, he was in Bhava, but so Krishna arranged that, and so the teaching of, so there are instances like that, but aside from that, overall, I think demonic influences are there as a result of the misuse of the freedoms that we have, especially in human life. What else?
The next question is from Gauravani.
Gauravani writes, Dandavat Pranams Guru Maharaj. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 15, Mahaprabhu and Advaita Prabhu exchange worship between each other. During that exchange, Mahaprabhu says to Advaita, Yosi, Sosi, Namostute. Whatever you are, but I offer my respects to you. Could you please say more about the meaning of this mantra and why Mahaprabhu says it to Advaita Prabhu?
Well, I think there was, in the context of Gaur Lila, there are differing opinions about who Advaita is and who Mahaprabhu is. Even within the family, amongst the sons of Advaita, some are said to have been deviant, and their deviation was that they felt that Advaita was superior to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because he was Mahavishnu. It's a pretty big offense. I mean, it's kind of funny to think about it in a way. It's a departure from the orthodox Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which of course posits that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Swami Bhagavan. But that was something that was, I understand, it was refined and theologically brought out, posited over time, but it wasn't apparent to everybody and anybody. The divinity of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was fairly apparent, but that he was Krishna himself, as it would be peculiar, and so you can read, for example, in Chaitanya Bhagavata, people have expressing different opinions when they see Gaur, Nityananda, or they saw Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lakshmi Priya, Vishnu Priya, and so forth. So this is one instance that some of the followers of Advaita thought of him in a different way. He, on the other hand, according to the orthodox position and what's presented in Chaitanya Charitamrita, saw Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which Krishna himself, who he petitioned to appear, and appear as an avatar, even though he's the avatari. Now, one might not understand that Krishna is an avatari and say that Advaita wanted the Krishna the avatar, and Krishna is one of the avatars of Narayan, and all of the avatars, they come through Mahavishnu. He's the original avatar, right? The first descent from the Paravyom into the material world is the Mahavishnu. So all the avatars come through him. So again, people have different perspectives on Advaita and what is his position in relation to Mahaprabhu. But Advaita maintained that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Krishna himself and that he was a servant of Krishna. Right? And he went out of his way to establish that, even to the extent of preaching Mayavad philosophy and getting chastised by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu so that he could celebrate publicly and say, just see, he's the Lord and I'm the servant. Something like that. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu may have been speaking in relation to the questions out and about that had not all been answered, if you will, over time. Who is Advaita exactly? Advaita is God. Chaitanya is God. What are their different roles or relationship with one another, and so forth. So it has to do with that. Is Krishna the avatar of Mahavishnu? Is he the avatari and appearing as an avatar? Is he appearing according to Advaita's will, or is Advaita's that a service that corresponds with Krishna's will to descend, and so on and so forth? So I think it has something to do with that, the different opinions that are out and about. What did he say in conclusion? Whoever you are, what is it? What is the verse?
Yosi?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yosi so si namo stute. Whatever you are,
Whatever you are. I offer my obeisances to you.
Yeah, I offer my respect.
Yeah. So I think that's the environment, if you will, the conceptual environment that arose out of. What else?
The next question is from Braj Sundari.
Yeah, so there's two questions. So we'll do the first one first, and the second one is related somewhat. So the first question is, if the deity in Murti or Shila form is abandoned due to the death of the Pujari, for instance, and the deity ends up in a very non-devotional environment, does Krishna remain there, hidden, blessing this environment, or does he leave, turning these forms into matter? Almost all the stories about the rediscovered deities come from India, where there are always some devotees around. So I'm wondering what happens if there are no devotees.
No, those devotees place themselves in museums and other places waiting for some devotee to come and see them, and then figure out how to get them out of there. And that has happened. Something like that. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So where is Krishna? Is he in the deity, or is he in the devotee? Who's the beholder? Well, I guess we would have to think that Krishna says that the devotee is more beautiful. The devotee says that Krishna is more beautiful. But the devotee says that whatever Krishna says is right. But that would not apply to Sakirasa. I don't know if you all got that, but so the beauty's in the eye of the beholder is my point. So when the devotee sees the deity in the light of his being present, then to that extent he's present. He comes on the will of the devotee, appears, is crafted, if you will, under the direction of the devotees, a manifestation of the heart of the devotee. So, like I say, some of them get found and put in museums and other places, and they're seen by devotees, and then they respond to those devotees in such a way that devotees find a way to turn their situation into a worshipable one. That happens. That's the way I would look at it. What's the second part?
The second part is that the scripture describes how to dispose of offered items that are of no use anymore. The problem is that some of the authorized methods, like burning, burying, or throwing things into the river, might be difficult or even illegal when one lives in a modern city. Even feeding the animals with offered food might end up with a fine and might not be the best for the animal's health. Devotees often go against the law or social norms to deal with that. And on the other hand, I heard of some Indian guru saying that throwing all kinds of Mahaprasadam into the garbage is okay because it will benefit the rats. It sounds gross, but is it true? Thank you.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. Not only rats, other living beings too. So you have to, to some extent, live within the laws of the country that you reside in and adjust accordingly. Of course, if the rats will eat the prasadam, why would they not be benefited, right? We have the example of Raghunath Das Goswami, where leftover prasad or something like that from Jagannath temple was being dealt with as far as possible, but there's always some remnants left, right? Some pieces that stick in the pot and so on. So this was somehow thrown out in the back, and the cows would eat, but Raghunatha Goswami was going and extracting it and finding it and eating it himself. And so Caitanya Mahaprabhu was very pleased to see his renunciation and his faith in Mahaprasadam. So he thought it was valuable, even if it was thrown away, and even the cows wouldn't eat it after a certain point. So it's good enough for Raghunatha Goswami, it must be good enough for the rats. Mahaprasad ki jai. What else?
So the next question is from Madhav.
He's on the call.
Swami Maharaj.
Yes.
My question is about the chapter on Dhyan Yoga. So, although this chapter is about Dhyan Yoga and Krishnaji hasn't yet discussed devotion proper, but is he indicating one's Swarup, Bhav, and Seva when in verse 5:16 he talks about the nature of one's relationship with God coming out after one's illusory sense of self is destroyed through knowledge? And if so, then does the next verse indicate Golok when he says that those who are devoted to God go to that place where one does not again take birth?
You want to read the two verses?
Yeah. So 5:16 says, "For those whose ignorance of the self has been destroyed by knowledge, that same knowledge reveals, like the shining sun, the nature of their relationship with God." And 5:17 says, "Those whose intelligence is absorbed in God, whose minds are fixed on God, and whose faith is in God, who are devoted to God, and whose impiety has thus been cast off through knowledge, go to that place where one does not again take birth."
Yeah, these are from the 5th chapter, not the 6th chapter. The 6th chapter is Dhyan Yoga, Ashtanga Yoga. So the 5th chapter is a little different, but those are very central verses to the 5th chapter. They emphasize the fact that aside from the jiva being a conscious entity, he or she also, the jiva has an attribute of knowledge, an attribute of knowledge that's covered, but comes out in due course by the appropriate sadhana, right? And that knowledge, we can call it, Ramanuja calls it Dhamma Bhuta Gyan, and Baladev Vidyabhushan seems to like that terminology. Jiva Goswami calls it Gyan Shakti. One reason he calls it Gyan Shakti is because the attribute of knowledge, is that which reveals the knowledge of things to the knowing agent, the conscious agent. So there's a conscious agent. He could just be conscious without content, contentless consciousness, like, say, in deep sleep. There's no content there, but the jiva is there. Sometimes that's given as an example. It's pretty abstract, and in some respects, contentless consciousness doesn't make a lot of sense. Therefore, someone like Ramanuja would say, no, it's not contentless consciousness in deep sleep, but the content just happens to be covered. That's all. So it's temporary absence, but that is a technical point. The point I'm making is that aside from the fact that we're not inert like matter, we're conscious of that I exist. The details of what I am further, for example, that I'm a servant of Bhagavan, that is revealed by the attribute of the jiva's knowledge, which is co-eternal with the jiva. Again, Ramanuja calls it Dharma Buddha Gyan. It means it's a Dharma. It means in this case, Dharma means characteristic or attribute. He would compare it to the knowing jiva that's conscious to be like the lotus, and its attribute of knowledge to be like blue color. They're inseparable from one another. That's his term. Madhva uses another term, and Baladev also uses it, called Vishesh, just to talk about the relationship between the conscious jiva and its attribute of knowledge. Vishesh is sometimes illustrated by the example of ocean and its waves. So the waves are different from the ocean, but they're not different. They're just the ocean, right? Same thing, inseparable, Vishesh. These two terms from Ramanuja Sampradaya and Madhva Sampradaya are also used in relation to Bhagavan and his qualities. They're one and different. And Jiva Goswami uses the term Achintya Veda Veda in relation to the Bhagavan and his qualities or his Shaktis. So arguably those two, Madhva and Baladev also, and Ramanuja also used that in relation to the jiva and its attributes of knowledge, its attribute of being of sheshatva, being a sheltered devotee, and so forth. So arguably that could be extended to also be described as Achintya Veda Veda, that is in Gaudiya Vaishnava, the relationship between the conscious jiva and its attribute of knowledge. Now, knowledge reveals content to the knowing subject, the self. That's the relationship between these two. They're eternal. So what the verse is talking about there is that it's talking about the Dharma Bhuta Gyan. Dharma Bhuta Gyan can become covered. The fact that I exist doesn't become covered, right? It may look like it to an observer, but I mean, we always, as far as we know, we always exist, right? We may say in a certain period of time, it doesn't look like on a historical clock that I existed, but as far as I know myself, I've always existed. Right? So there's a sense in which even in conditioned life, in which the fact that we exist, that we're conscious and rather than inert, is apparent. But there are other things about ourself that are, and there are things about other things that the self is not informed about. So its knowledge, its attribute of knowledge, informs, reveals. It doesn't know anything, but it's a revealer to the conscious agent. So one of the things about the self that it doesn't know, just based on its being aware of itself, is that it's a servant of Bhagavan, right? A particular servant of Bhagavan. So that knowledge of that's included in its attribute of Dharma Bhuta Gyan, or which Jiva Goswami calls Gyan Shakti. He calls it Gyan Shakti because his whole system is based on Shakti. And he says that the attribute of Gyan, of the Jiva, functions, this is his ontological position, and part of its ontology is that it has Gyan that reveals knowledge to itself. But it's functional, its ontological status is one thing, but its function in this regard requires a Shakti, understandably, right? And so there are two Shaktis. There's Maya Shakti and there's Swarup Shakti, right? So if in order for that Gyan to function, well, it malfunctions, so to speak, when the jiva is in samsara, and the Maya Shakti is the vehicle. So your knowledge is distorted or contracted, right? And the actual inherent Shakti that's tied to an eternal and inherent quality or attribute of knowledge of the jiva is unmanifest. And what Shakti is that? That's the Shakti by which the knowledge of the Jiva expands into omniscience in liberation, and by which it functions there. So that's we call that Swarup Shakti, right? If the Jiva has attributes, it's a knower and a doer, an experiencer, and has inherent servanthood, then all those attributes have to function. They require Shakti. That Shakti will be Swarup Shakti. That's how the spiritual world works, right? So because the qualities are inherent in the Jiva, the Shakti that enables them to function in eternity must be inherent. Whereas in material life, the qualities or the attributes are mediated and only partially functioning through the influence of an extrinsic Shakti, the Maya Shakti. The Maya Shakti, they're only functioning partially. As far as knowing goes, for example, well, Maya has two features, vidya and avidya, who are the lower modes of nature and let's say sattva, from which knowledge comes. So this is the Shakti then, and these portions of the Shakti, vidya and avidya, by which the Jiva's knowledge, its attribute of knowledge, functions in a limited way in material life. But for it to fully function, and for it, in this inherent quality to be fully operative, it requires Shakti. That Shakti cannot be extrinsic to the Jiva. Otherwise, you'd have a situation like material life. So that's what the verse is talking about. It's talking about its Dharma Bhuta Gyan, or the Gyan Shakti of the Jiva. That's covered. And that, yes, by sadhana, by grace, it comes out. And yes, then one of the things that comes out, and the most substantial and significant, the full face of its knowledge manifesting, is knowledge of myself as a devotee of Krishna. Now, could be Goloka, could be Vaikuntha, that it depends on your svabhav, but in a sense, yes, that's what the verses are talking about. They're very important verses. So thank you for bringing them up. A little technical, but I hope you follow.
Thank
Okay.
you. Pranav.
So
Maybe I'll send you a couple paragraphs to restate that in a way that you can appreciate. All right, what else?
So the next question is from Ram Mohan.
Guru Maharaj.
Yes.
I have a question about Hasya Ras and Balaram. Seeing as he presides over Hasya Ras, where can we find examples of this? Are there examples of him expressing Hasya Ras, or how can we see him presiding over?
Well, one of the prominent ways, I think, is in the beginning of the 15th chapter, the 10th canto, where Krishna puts himself, to some extent, in the space of Balaram and begins to joke. He glorifies Balaram. It's an expression of Hasya Rasa. So he starts praising Balaram, glorifying him to all the devotees and all the inhabitants of the forest, and so on and so forth. And what he's saying about Balaram is true, but because there's truth in jest, but beyond that, he's speaking about himself. But rather than just glorifying himself, as his Poganda lila begins to manifest, he glorifies Balaram. It's in jest. So in one sense, it's appropriate. given that Balaram is the presiding deity of that. Now, you're looking for instances in which Balaram becomes a joker, I guess, and tells jokes and so on and so forth. Like Madhu Mangal, you might think he would be more better shelter of Hasirasa, but of course he's not Bhagawan. So, outside of that, I can't think at the moment of a particular lila that we take it for granted that he's got a good sense of humor. What else?
The next question is from Kanuram.
Good morning, Guru Maharaj. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, hello.
Good morning. My question comes from Jaiva Dharma. I'm in chapter 22, I believe, that the initial discussion of Prayojan, and the topic again is bhava. I'll just have to read you the section, and I know that you've talked about this sometimes using different terms than Bhakti Vinod, and maybe that's part of my confusion, but it's about Vaidhi sadhana and Raga-Nuga sadhana. But I'll read you the section and maybe that'll make my question clear. Raghunath Das Babaji, Vrajanath asks, are there different varieties of bhava? Raghunath Das Babaji says, yes. According to their different sources, there are two varieties of bhava originating from Sri Krishna and his pure devotees. Sadhana, abhini vesha, ja bhava, bhava arising through sadhana, and prasada, ja bhava, bhava arising through mercy. And bhava generally implies the former. The latter is extremely rare. And then he goes on to say that this particular bhava, the sadhana bhava, is of two kinds, corresponding to the paths of sadhana bhakti, vaidhi, and Raga-Nuga. Initially, bhava generates ruchi in the heart of the devotee, later asakti, attachment for the Lord, and finally rati, love. The scriptures and the Vedic science of the performing arts treat bhava and rati as synonyms, and so will I. In Vaidhi bhakti, bhava is an unmanifest state known as shraddha. First, shraddha matures and becomes nishta, steadfastness, which produces ruchi, taste. In Raga-Nuga bhakti, however, bhava generates ruchi right from the beginning. So I guess I'd just like to hear you explain this again, because I think that we're on the Raga-Marga, but I just find this easy to misunderstand repeatedly.
Well, what he's saying there is that, as Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu explains, that one can attain bhava by sadhana or by grace. And the latter is more rare, and the former is more the norm, by grace. That's the first thing he says. And then he says that within this sadhana bhakti, then there are two varieties. There's Vaidhi bhakti and there's Raga bhakti. Right? And in Raga bhakti, you have shraddha is the beginning, in Vaidhi bhakti, the eligibility to tread the path comes from faith, which comes through sadhusanga, and one proceeds growing that faith through different stages. And the later stages of that sadhana are ruchi, taste, natural attraction, and attachment to the object of love, and then bhava, right? That's it. But he says when it comes to Raga-Nuga bhakti, then as he has said elsewhere in his Bhakti Tattva Vivek, while Vaidhi bhakti is adhikar is shraddha, Raga bhakti is lobhamayi shraddha. Means shraddha, faith, but it's saturated with lobha. Lobha means like greed or taste for the ideal. And then the practice is all driven by that. So that's the difference. Now, that said, there's different ways in which that lobha is talked about, but I think that it's a very strong word, lobha. It means like greed, like I've got to have it, kind of a thing, which doesn't leave a lot of room for other desires. I'm driven by that, right? It's said to be easier and make progress quicker, because obviously if you do something you like, it's easier to do than if you do something because you're told to do it and you know that it's good for you to do. But we can't just say, well, I think they take the easier path. If you don't have the taste, it's easier, but it's not easy to get the taste. But it may come over lifetimes, so forth. Now, that said, yes, we also consider ourselves to be on the Raga-Marga, but we may not have lobha. Or you might have some, like, just, some semblance of lobha or something like that. The semblance of lobha would come from association in a Raga-Marga lineage, and the ideal that it posits with all the reasoning behind it and everything. Why Goloka Vrindavan? Why Sakya Bhav? Why Madhurya Bhav is the best ideal, and so on. So you hear all those things and you're drawn in by that. And the reason we're drawn in by that is because we have a swabhav that is, corresponds with that. So typically that's why we're drawn to this sampradaya, right? The main bhavas that we find in the sampradaya, that the sampradaya caters to by way of truths about it being disseminated, examples of it being available, and so forth, are Sakya and Madhurya, Nityananda Prabhu and Caitanya Mahaprabhu, or the Samasti Gurus. They embody both of these. The latter, the Madhurya Bhav, is the primary Bhav in one sense, predominant, and the Sakya Bhav is there, plays somewhat of a supportive role to that. And of course, it's full in itself as well. So because we say, oh, then we will be attracted according to our swabhav, it doesn't necessarily mean that today I say, I think I want to become a gopi of Balaram, and that's going to be that's my attraction. And then you have to say, well, what does that mean? Where do you get that from? What does that mean to you? And explain, what, and see, do you understand the tattva, and what actually is the sampradaya is more readily exemplifies and gives teachings about, and so forth. I mean, there's not much teaching to be said about becoming a gopi of Balaram, for example. And for that matter, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has described that as Maryadava, Maryada or Vaidhi rather than Raga-Marga, and so on and so forth. So the guru would want to test the disciple and inform the disciple, and perhaps in this case say, what's happening here is your mind, based on your material samskars, are causing this, rather than your actual swabhav manifesting. Something to this effect. There can always be exceptions to everything, but but by and large, this is why we're in the sampradaya. Now, there will be other people in the sampradaya that's true that have a different swabhav, and that's because Caitanya Mahaprabhu is also the Yuga avatar. He comes to collect gopis. That's his kind of vow in the Bhagavatam. Krishna says, I'm going to try to make up for my inability to reciprocate for your love by way of becoming a sadhu. You are saintly, and your saintliness is its own reward, and it exceeds anything that I can give you. So let me try to become a sadhu myself, and bring maidservants to Radharani, something like that. But of course, this Madhurya Bhav, it doesn't appear in a vacuum. So in order for there to be Parakiya Bhav and Radha Dasyam, there has to be other bhavas, Vatsalya, Dasya, Sakya, and so forth. Therefore, Krishna's Kaviraj says Mahaprabhu came to give these bhavas. Now, if we study the Sampradaya, we see, well, Dasya, of course, is there. It's the underlying reality of all the bhavas, and that they're all really forms of Dasya. And the Dasya of Goloka is 99% of it is influenced by Sakya Bhava. Okay, so Vatsalya Bhava is not a prominent bhava that's cultivated there are many bhajans or deity worship, for example, that's been given in the sampradaya for this type of bhava. But Mahaprabhu gave a blessing to a Vallabha to have his own sampradaya. Of course, it's in line with Vishnu Swami sampradaya, one of the 4 sampradayas, but it's the Rudra sampradaya. But in that sampradaya, and he was a contemporary of Mahaprabhu, in that sampradaya, there is everyone who gets initiated, they get a lot of Gopal deity, and they're trained to worship the deity in their household, make their household a little temple and cook for him and so forth, and they offer him toys and things like that. So here's a sampradaya that facilitates this. Now, someone may join the Gaudiya sampradaya because it is the sampradaya in which the Yuga avatar himself appeared, and he happens to be Swami Bhagavan himself. And he has his own internal mission, as I mentioned, right, to collect servants for Radharani and a few friends too, because the whole affair of within Gaudiya Vaishnavism is that's central is the fact that Krishna has fallen in love with all of the sisters of all of his friends. So it's a romantic comedy amongst early pre-adolescence even, and up to adolescence itself. But early adolescence, and it freezes there at 16, let's say, sweet 16. So, that's the central focus. But of course, it's assisted by Vatsalya Rasa, by Dasya Rasa, and so forth. So anyway, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not only the avatari, he's coming in the role of the avatar, the Yuga avatar, then he's distributing a Maha Mantra that has breadth and depth. The depth takes us to Sakya Bhav or Radhadasyam, Madhurasa, and the breadth extends such that it really facilitates anyone developing a rasa that corresponds with their swabhav, but may be taught in more detail and further facilitated in a different sampradaya. Therefore, we find some devotees come to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's sampradaya because its prominence, you see how prominent it is all over the world. And that through our particular paribar within the sampradaya. And so even devotees who end up, I just heard about a lady, a god sister of mine, who joined the Ramanuja Sampradaya in South India and said she thinks she joined the wrong movement. I always said, no, you joined the right movement and it brought you there. It took you there according to your swabhav. It brought you in. This is exactly what you would expect from the Yuga avatar, that he would nourish all the sampradayas, which is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur predicted Mahaprabhu would do. And I see that it's doing that. So aside from those exceptions, Mahaprabhu is bringing people to those sampradayas, and he's also just giving credibility to those sampradayas. And our particular paribar has done hard work for that. We strongly emphasize this is Bhaktivinoda's strong focus, that our sampradaya is one of the 4 sampradayas. He called it the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Mayapur installed deities of Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka, Ramanuja, and Madhva. We're not in isolation. There's some Gaudiya people who want to say, we're our own sampradaya, we don't care anything about these other sampradayas. But Jiva Goswami cared about them. He mentions this in his Tattva Sandarbha, which is that whole, tattva of the Siddhanta of Gaudiya Vaishnavas. He's drawing on Ramanuja, he draws on Madhva, he draws on Sridhar Swami from the Vishnu Swami Sampradaya, the Rudra Sampradaya, and so forth, to one extent or another. He formed his own sampradaya, but it's not formed, again, in a vacuum. He gains credibility for what he's talking about by taking elements from different sampradayas to form his own. And so the sampradaya itself, through our particular paribar, has given energy to, for example, Ramanuja Sampradaya or Madhva Sampradaya or Nimbarka Sampradaya, brought to light that they even exist. people could know about them. So I know devotees who have joined the Gaudiya Sampradaya and become Balabhas. I know more than one. I know more than one who become Ramanujas, and so forth. So this is the Yuga Avatar function. But as far as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, internal purpose and the mainstream, if you will, it's a Raga-Marga Sampradaya, and it facilitates these vibhavas for Sakya Rasa and Madhurya Rasa primarily. That's what it most facilitates directly. And so are we Raga-Marga Bhaktas? But how can that be? Sounds good, but we don't have the Lobha, you might say. Lobha Maheshwara, but you have a little bit of Lobha. So I think I mentioned this in my chapter on Raga-Nuga Bhakti in Circle of Friends. You might want to look that up, where it talks about Lobha and kind of you could look at it kind of on a scale. And we can do that because in Bhakti Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami has spoken about Ajata Ruchi Raga-Nuga Bhakti, which seems like an oxymoron because Ruchi means Lobha, driven by taste. But Ajata, when the taste has not yet arisen, but it's Raga-Nuga Bhakti. How can it be Raga-Nuga Bhakti when the taste hasn't arisen yet? Well, that's the condition that you find yourself in. Because if I was to ask you what you're attracted to in terms of a prayojan, you would tell me something about the Braj Lila, right? You would tell me about the cowherd friends of Krishna and all such leelas. You wouldn't tell me about Vaikuntha or Ayodhya. Right? So you have some attraction for that. That's your motivating force. Probably just to say, read the first 9 cantos, then the 10th canto. One of my godbrothers says, well, why did you publish the Krishna book first? It's the 10th canto, and we're selling it at Kmart's, and the shopping centers, all over the gas stations, all over the country. And Prabhupada said, you have to give a little taste in the beginning to get them motivated, right? Then they have to understand the underlying tattva and undergo the practices and so on. But this is the motivating force. So we're motivated by that, by the ideal of Goloka, of the Braj Lila. Some few people may not be, but they shouldn't be out of place. They should feel Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Yuga Avatar is facilitating that. So this, anyway, for us, that's called Ajata Ruchi Raga-Nuga Bhakti. You get some taste for it, right? But you have taste for other things, and your practice is not driven simply by a taste. Much of the practice you do is because you should do it, and that. So it's a mix of Vaidhi and Raga-Nuga Bhakti, but not a mix of Vaidhi and Raga-Nuga Bhakti as an orientation. In other words, if you mix Raga-Nuga and Vaidhi Bhakti as an orientation for a goal that will come out of that in and of itself, you'll end up in Mathura. If it's just Vaidhi Bhakti for Krishna, you'll end up in Dwarka, maybe as a queen of Dwarka or something like that. But if you mix the two, because that's the level of your adhikar, but your ideal is Goloka, then gradually the taste for the Raga-Marga will come, and the extent to which you're performing Vaidhi Bhakti out of a sense of duty and responsibility will diminish accordingly. Of course, Vaidhi Bhakti is constituted of different angas of bhakti given by Rupa Goswami, so many of them, and we do all of them, and incorporating them, they're incorporated into Vaidhi Raga-Nuga Bhakti. It's not that you do Raga-Nuga Bhakti and you don't chant anymore, or you don't take shelter of a guru, which are angas of Vaidhi Bhakti, but they're angas of Raga Bhakti too, but their orientation is different. So I hope that helps. It's fairly comprehensive answer, I would think.
Yes, thank you, Guru Maharaj, and thank you for the expansion on the whole Sampradaya. And I'll circle back to that section in Circle of Friends.
Okay, very good. Very good.
Is a follow-up to this, Guru Maharaj, from Kishore Krishna.
Pranams, Guru Maharaj.
Haribol.
Hari. I was recently listening to a podcast by a devotee named Hari Parshad, who is a Shiksha student of Gaur Govinda Maharaj. And he presented a lot of nice ideas.
Is it Hari Parshad or Hari Prasad?
I think Hari Parshad. I could be wrong.
Okay. Could be. That's fine. Yeah.
And
you go ahead.
Yeah, so he was he had a very generous, non-sectarian approach, very balanced. But one thing that I found a little, I was uncertain about. He presented the idea that previously Gaudiya Vaishnavism was mostly contained in small circles, which allowed it to be very informal, personal, unique, which facilitated distribution of the Raga-Marga. And his idea was that once it becomes big enough, like in Prabhupada's mission, it's almost inevitable that it creates formalities, and therefore it's somewhat akin to distributing Vaidhi to the general public. And I don't, he's maybe using Vaidhi in a different way, but and that within that, there'll be pockets of kind of more devotees that are more interested in rag and kind of deeper subjects. So I was just wondering what your ideas are on that.
Well, based on my last answer to Kanaram, I think that I would differ in that we're distributing the same thing to everybody, and in a way that more than any other sampradaya, in a powerful way, we can serve to bring out your svabhava and then situate you accordingly. For the most part, it'll be within the sampradaya in terms of the goals that are prominently exemplified, by the predecessor acharyas, saints, and so forth, right? Sadhus in our line. But obviously, in the context of the wide distribution over time, some persons are going to make advancement, and they're going to understand more what it is they're involved in, what the practices are, and they're going to and their svabhava is going to start to come out, and then they're going to consult with their guru, and then they're going to get advice and focus your practice like this, and so forth, and that will be a smaller number than the large number, and to the larger number, you're not going to you're not going to give talks about the intricacies of Manjari Bhav or something like that, which are subjects of books like Ujjwal Nilmani, or even the intricacies of Sakyaras, for subject of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. It's a chapter on that. You're going to talk about the body, reincarnation, Krishna's God, Mayavad is bad, these kind of things. But I wouldn't distinguish the two in that way, in a hard kind of distinction. And I would think that just naturally some devotees will advance, progress, and then consultation with their guru, their practice on the one hand will become more internal, but they'll set an example externally for everyone else that they can follow. So I guess I would differ a little bit on that, and I would be careful with this idea of they're going to be a little like Prabhupada didn't like the Gopi Bhav Club, which sounds like what he's talking about. A little group over here, they're just going to talk about gopis, and they're going to be a little separate, and so forth. Of course, that was very early on in the mission also, and it was influenced by Radhakund Babas and whatnot, and their idea of what it means to cultivate Raga-Nuga Bhakti. So we have to be a little careful about that also, because those ideas are out and about, and they, when there's not an emphasis theologically and philosophically on what Raga-Nuga Bhakti is and so forth, and then great acharya like Prabhupada passes from the world, and then someone says, "What about Raga Bhakti?" I don't remember reading that term. Oh, it's there, yeah. And this is what it's all about. And you didn't get this, and so forth. And then they start giving practices and so forth that are not really part of our own lineage, coming from Bhaktivinoda, and for good reason. Yeah. And so then you get a problem, and you think, I've got to get my Siddha Pranali or whatever, which is just not a fact. In the ways in which it's sometimes talked about in those circles and so on. And it's not really such a mental exercise of sorts, if you will. So as Bhaktisiddhanta used to like to say, it all manifests from the holy name. Of course, obviously, we wrote a book about Sakya Rasa. We have some attraction for that, so we detailed it in such a way we thought it was a contribution, but it's you wouldn't need more than that, and then the holy name to know everything you need to know about how to practice Raga-Nuga Bhakti. How do you practice something that you have a taste, that I have a taste for? There's no practice. It's natural and spontaneous. I mean, I don't want to criticize him, but I would just, look at the way he framed that a little bit differently. I had never met him. He seems to be a learned devotee that's a popular person in ISKCON for talking, and I think he probably, from prior to joining, he knows some Indian languages, Sanskrit, maybe Bengali, and so forth. So it's nice that he's able to take some of the ISKCON devotees deeper into some of the texts and so on. But the Gayatri mantra is a Raga-Marga mantra, and I would say that. As I heard a little bit of that talk myself, so now I ran into that. And he gave an example, which I didn't agree with. He said, well, just like Gayatri mantra, it's worship of the sun god. So, what place does it have for Raga-Nuga Bhakti? Well, we think that because Radharani is worshiping the sun god in Radhakund, we'll go with her at that time and we'll chant it. That's not the way it's looked at in by Jiva Goswami. He explains that the Gayatri mantra is the Raga-Marga mantra. It's the commentary on the Bhagavatam is a commentary on the meaning and implications of the Raga-Marga, which is about Krishna. It includes lower ideas too, like Surya and Narayan said, but properly understood, it's very appropriate for Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And Puja Pachita Maharaj gave a beautiful commentary on it, demonstrating how it takes one to dasya, Radha Dasya. After all, Rag Bhakti is. It is said in the Puranic stories and whatnot that Gayatri was a village girl from Braj, kidnapped by Brahma's assistants when he needed a wife to perform some function in a yajna where his wife wasn't present, Saraswati. So they captured her. Her name was Gayatri, and the residents of Gopas complained, and Vishnu intervened and said, "Well, I'll make up for it, but sometime in the future by appearing in your family lineage." And so when he did, Gayatri was very attracted. So she expanded as Kam Gayatri, as a Gopi in Braj. And so everything that's in the Kam Gayatri is in the Brahma Gayatri, but in a covert form. And it must be so, because it's a commentary on the Bhagavatam. Or excuse me, the Bhagavatam is a commentary on the meaning of the Gayatri mantra. So it's important to have good guidance in all of this. I hope that helps. Okay. Well, they got me a little excited with that one. So good. We're over time. It's nice to be with you all. And I hope to see you next week also. Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai.
Jai. Sri Guru Maharaj.
Premanande.
Haribol. And rest well, Guru Maharaj.
Thank you.
And thanks for your questions, everybody who sent some last minute questions. You'll be first next time. And as always, let us know and we'll add you to the list for next time. And have a lovely week. And we'll speak to you soon. Haribol.